a visualization of how we can imagine it. So you can see it goes back, from Homo sapiens to your right, all the way back to Australopithecines. And you can see already one thing, which is that the brain has evolved massively. It has tripled over the last few million years in volume. At the very left is a surviving species, the chimpanzee. So you can see like an Australopithecus, which was sort of a very early form of our ancestry. We didn't really have much bigger brains than they do today. Okay, so what does that tell us about language? Well, very little, actually nothing. But what you can do is what's been done more recently. You can try and guess what did the brain look like that was inside these skulls. And so just to give you an idea, so these are two modern species, humans, on your right, and then chimpanzees on the left. And the brain is not just sort of a balloon, it has structure. And these structures of the brain leave their traces in the endocasts. So you can, with good analysis techniques, you can get some sort of sense of what the brain looked like inside these fossil endocasts. And so this is a study that was done recently with CT scans. I'm just going to kind of walk you through this quick. Well, first of all, sorry, before we move on, when you compare a modern human and a modern chimp brain, you can see that they're largely similar, but there are also a couple of differences. And one difference is that I would like you to focus on is this thick red line here and this blue line here. And we don't need to know any more details, but what you can see already is that in chimpanzees, these two lines cross, and in humans, they're spread apart, mainly because the frontal lobe expanded so massively during our evolution. So this is a marker of brain structure. And now the simple idea was, the genius idea was to go and look for this particular structure in fossil hominids. And that's the result that came out of this study. So that was Zollikofer's lab in Zurich who did this. And so then what they found is that, first of all, on the x-axis, you can see sort of the time zero, that's sort of now, going back to about 2 million years in the past. Here's the brain volume. You can see we're up there here somewhere, very large brains. And here is all our ancestry. And you can see if you turn the time back, then you have, fossil hominids that had a brain organization just like ours in blue. But then, once you pass about 1 million years and a little more, it becomes a bit murky. And then from about sort of 1.5 down to 2 million years in the past, all these individuals had chimpanzee-like brains. Chimpanzees don't have language, humans do. So the simple conclusion might be that, well, they probably didn't have human-like language abilities. So that's, one way to study this. So it tells you something about the timing of the evolutionary sequence. Well, another approach I just quickly want to go through before I then go over to the primates is ancient DNA. So that's another way by which you can study the evolution of things. So here is a paper that was published, some years ago, and it's based on a whole series of studies on one particular gene, on I think the chromosome 7, which is called the FOXP2 gene. And turns out that if there are genetic problems with the FOXP2 gene, people have a speech disorder. They cannot really talk properly. There's a very famous family in the UK that has this inherited problem, and for these individuals, it's very hard to learn how to speak. Well, it suggests that this gene is somehow relevant in the development of the language, or at least speech capacity. And what's also interesting is that humans have a unique version of this FOXP2 gene. It's different from the same gene that you would sequence in a gorilla or a chimpanzee or an orangutan. So we are unique here. And so people have argued that perhaps, these mutations in this gene somehow were responsible for the evolution, at least of the speech capacity. Now, what's interesting is if you now with ancient DNA look at early humans, then in this one study from fragments from Spain, from Neanderthals in Spain, they were able to sequence this gene and found that they in fact had a modern human type of FOXP2, suggesting that, if this gene is really that important, that these Neanderthals should have been able to speak. There we go. So this is really about the timing, what's the sort of evolutionary time course of all this. But what I want to do now is to switch over and talk about primates. So that's the sort of third way by which you can investigate evolutionary processes or study human evolution. You can do comparisons. You compare modern humans, the way they are now, with our closest living relatives, the chimps, the bonobos, the gorillas, the orangutans, but also the monkeys, right? So we are primates. So this whole clade this whole group is of interest. And the argument is that, if, for example, humans have an ability that chimpanzees also have, the same ability. For example, we don't have tails. Chimpanzees also don't have tails. Well, you can conclude with pretty much confidence that the common ancestor here, that lived maybe 5, 6, 7 million years ago also didn't have a tail. And the same you can apply also to the brain and its capacities. And so, if two species share something, that suggests that the ancestor also had this. All right. So now, like before the talk here, we had this discussion. So, what about all these apes that have been raised by humans? Do they tell us something about this? I think, yes, they do, but it's, there is this sort of chimps that have learned sign language and people try to teach them how to speak and so on. You probably have seen this in television or so. But we should never forget that, these are not sort of normal animals, right? They've been brought up in a human environment. They're heavily enculturated. They've been taught, time and again to do certain things. So we don't really learn anything about evolution in a strict way because they are, they've been taught human systems. We don't know anything about their own capacities. So we need field work. We need to go out and study them in the wild. And I want to run you through a few studies that have been done to give you a flavor of what these animals can do. So the classic study, if you want, was done by Robert Seyfarth and Dorothy Cheney many years ago in Kenya. They studied vervet monkeys. And what was known already is that these monkeys have different alarm calls to external events. So a leopard shows up, the monkeys give a leopard alarm call. All right, or they see a snake and they give another call. Because it may sound similar to you, but if you do acoustic analysis and all, then you can see there are consistent differences. And the ultimate proof that these are really different signals is when you do playbacks. So you record the calls, you play it back to the monkeys, and you see how they react. And if the monkey, hears this call, the first one, and, believes, for example, that a leopard's nearby, you would expect a specific response. And I'm just going to show you a video. So here, is this monkey group feeding, and then they hear a leopard alarm call. And you can see this, like within milliseconds, they run off and they seem to understand what this call's about. Now compare this to a snake alarm, which is now the video clip at the bottom. Same situation from a speaker. Someone plays snake alarms. So you think, so they see something. This wasn't the playback yet. There was another disturbance, but now suddenly you can tell. There's no sound, but you can tell immediately. Now, you can see it's very different, right? They stand on their hind legs. They look towards the speaker, trying to find the snake. There is none. And then they sort of decide to go, except for him. So, so now the next, so this was all, very exciting. And now people have obviously then asked a whole bunch of new questions like, how did they learn these signals? How did they learn to understand that, this means leopard and the other means snake? You have to somehow, there's no way you can somehow know this intuitively. So, so here's a study that we done with Suti Mangabis in West Africa, in Ivory Coast. And so what these monkeys experience in the forests is they have at least 3 predators that are very dangerous to them every day. The first one are snakes, which don't necessarily hunt them, but they can be accidents. And especially these gaboon and rhinoceros vipers, which are extremely well camouflaged. So here is one, you can probably not even see it. It's just, I'll show you the video after. And so here's a couple of young monkeys, 1 or 2 year olds, that encounter this snake, and now the question is, so how do they know what call to give? How do they know to give a snake alarm? And if others call, how do they learn? Anyway, I'm going to show you the video so you get a sense of what this looks. So the snake is here. It's really large. And the monkeys have seen it as that was an alarm, and you can see they're quite a bit lost. They don't quite know what to do, and look around, and then eventually they climb up into the lower canopy. And so here, first one goes up, and then they sort of watch the scene from above. And until other group members arrive, and then at some point, when everyone has seen the snake, then they move on. So that's sort of, they kind of look for others to come and sort of clarify the situation. So this is sort of typical snake response.
That's evil.
Right. Okay. Now we thought, well, this may be interesting to study in terms of how these meanings are acquired. And so, we had this idea to present them a kind of an ambiguous predator. So this is a bit ridiculous, but it worked really well. So this is a snake, but what it had a body that looked a bit like a leopard tail, right? And the leopard is the other major predator for these monkeys. And they encounter them very often. And as you've seen before, for leopards, you really have to run as fast as you can and hide somewhere. And so so this is Julian Leon, who did this for his PhD. So he fabricated these models, put them out in the forest, and let the monkeys encounter them naturally. And the question was, well, how do they react now? Do they give leopard alarms? Do they give snake alarms? What do they do? Well, it turns out that when an adult, fully grown monkey came and saw this thing, they pretty much ignored it. So they didn't really react at all. And we thought that was interesting because somehow they realized that this is not possible, right? This is beyond what can be expected in these forests. And perhaps they assigned it to us, I don't know. But the juveniles were very different. They reacted quite strongly. And interestingly, some juveniles gave snake alarms and other juveniles gave leopard alarms. So they're almost two, so they weren't sure which way to go, right? They've seen leopards before and snakes, and so they picked sort of one solution. So we thought, well, maybe they need a bit of help from the adults to do one interpretation or the other. So in the experiment, we went to another group that was naive to this, showed the snake again to a juvenile, and then at the same time, we played back a leopard alarm call from an adult or a snake alarm call from an adult. And now the little monkey, in a way, has almost like instructions what this might entail, right? And so in one case, an adult says it's snake, and for another monkey, another adult says it's leopard. And what was really striking when we showed this model then for a second time to the same young monkey, it was already clear that the monkey had learned something. So here is a monkey that was primed with the model plus a snake alarm from an adult. You can see he sees the snake now for a second time in his life, I mean the chimera model, and he does sort of snake-like behavior. So he lingers around, he gets on his hind legs and looks, and you know, doesn't do much else. Alarm calls as well, calls the others to come. Now compare this to, compare it to this monkey who sees the chimera for a second time, and immediately runs away. So he has had the leopard training from the adults, and looks like he hasn't forgotten. We then you know, COVID happened. We had to stop, and but went back after about a year and a half and tried to find some of these individuals again. And it turned out they still followed these rules. So they haven't forgotten, right? So this is really stamped into their mind, so to speak. Okay, so that's the data. I mean, we can skip that, but just to show you that it was all done sort of properly. Now, what about the grey apes, right? So this is really what we want to know. And so, do they have any alarm calls? And the answer was, people looked, right? We thought, well, you know, if the vervet monkeys have this alarm call system, you know, what do we expect from the chimps? Well, it turns out they don't really have the same sort of very specific alarm calls for different predators. They have sort of a general alert call that they give when they find something disturbing, and then they usually want others to come, and then they share the experience. It's all done with sort of a social connection. So I want to show you a video that illustrates this quite well. So here's a chimp. There's a snake model. He's seen the snake model. And you can see he doesn't really say much yet. He just sort of looks, is alone. He gives this sort of soft whoos, this alert whoos, looks around if someone else is here. And then at some point, he realizes that his friend's coming, following him. And at that moment, he alarm calls.
He's here a snake and the...
Sorry, that's just the researcher commenting. See? So he turned around, he saw his friend, he goes, "Whoo!" And that's a proper snake alert who. You know, the other guy realizes, stops, looks who's coming. So they inform each other. And that's another level of communication where the signal is really given to someone specific to inform someone. You don't get that kind of evidence in monkeys. You know, apes are different here. They seem to be aware of what the other knows and doesn't know. So for this, we did a follow-up experiment. So it was the same thing again. We had the snake model out. But now, before the chimp discovered the snake, we simulated the presence of an ignorant group member who didn't know there was a snake, or a knowledgeable group member who knew there was a snake, right? So if you want to inform someone, you should only do it to the first one, to the ignorant one, not to the knowledgeable one. And so to do this, we played back a rest who from another group member, suggesting that he's just resting near the snake, not knowing there's a snake, and then checking what do they do. So here is one of these playback trials. Rest who is played. Think now. See, he turns around. He wonders, why is this guy giving a rest to? He doesn't know yet there's a snake, right? But then they walk over, they discover the snake, and in these moments they call, because they seem to think that their audience is ignorant still about the snake. So this is a bit of a lengthy video, so I'm going to fast forward it, but you can see now he goes and it kind of looks for the guy who called before, goes over, and then at some point here's the snake, right, where the red dot is. He sees the snake, and now he calls when you know, to warn the other guy because he's ignorant. He's stressed. He scratches himself, so he's really not in a good state. You know, he's trying to find the ignorant guy and inform him. So that's that's sort of what chimps do. Now, people always ask about gestures. So they happen, of course, and there was one study where we looked at this, and it's kind of a funny one. It's bonobos. So these are not, they look a bit like chimps, but it's a different species, as probably many of you know. And this is in a sanctuary in the Congo, where they hand raise them and then try to release them again after. And so here is a young male who's trying to convince a female to mate with him. And he doesn't use vocalizations, but uses gestures, and he does it in a very human-like way. He sort of beckons her, right? So if you just sort of watch this spectacle, then you immediately understand what goes on. So the female is not visible yet, but you see her after. So he wants to go down with her to the pond, and tries to persuade her to follow him. So you can see he does this weird arm waving and explains what it's about. And again waves to her, and you can see her, she watches this whole thing. And eventually she's persuaded and gets up and follows him. He even indicates with his head, like, which way we're going. I mean, it's really very human-like, you know, if you... Okay, so that's the bonobos. So we've looked for this in the wild as well, and to be honest, we haven't really seen anything equivalent. So this may be a local tradition that they've developed here. Okay, now, so a couple of newer studies. So this has just come out recently. Gorillas. Gorillas have always been sort of looked down upon by primatologists because they don't really, do, all this great stuff in the lab like the chimpanzees do. And so people have sort of not paid much attention. And also they're very quiet creatures. You know, they mainly grunt. They don't really have this spectacular vocal behavior like chimpanzees. So they've been sort of ignored for a while. And so I was lucky enough to be able to send a student to the Central African Republic to study the gorillas. And we were interested in travel, right? So the problem they've got is a bit like what you see here, you know, that everyone's sort of doing their own thing. And then one individual wants to go, wants to move on, go somewhere else to another feeding area. So how does he persuade the rest of the group to come with him or her? And so here is a video. So here's the adult male. He would like to go, but his females are not in the mood yet. They all so he gives a grumble. You can't really hear it well, but it goes like that. And you can see his problem. The females are just all over this clearing here, doing their own thing, and no one's interested. No one listens to him. So that was unsuccessful. And so what turns out is that they have a very simple vocal system that is used to solve this really complicated coordination problem, right? You probably know it when you're like on holidays with your family and, the person wants to go to the museum and the other one is hungry and all that. How do you solve this problem, right? We use communication a lot. They can't speak, but they have exactly the same problem because they need to stay together. So how do they do it? Well, they do it with two calls. One is grunts, single grunts, like... and grumbles, like that. So these are the two calls that they can give. And it turns out that they have different functions. So this was the work done by Laura Nellison. She just graduated a few weeks ago. So she looked at how animals give these calls and what do they do with them. So it turns out here, if you look at this figure here, sorry, I'm just going to walk you through, the grumbles, the long one, are really given by the ones who initiate, like the male you've seen before. The individuals who want to go somewhere, they grumble, And you can see the followers usually don't grumble. So this is really a call to indicate to the others, I would like to go now, and I would like to go in that direction, because they usually also move already. But then they also grunt. Everyone grunts all the time. And you can see here in this graph, this is nothing to do with initiating or following. So what's going on? Why do they also grunt? And so we checked, and it turns out that this grunting is a little bit like a voting system. So what you see here is a group of 5 adults. And so someone has given a grumble, and now the first one grunts, nothing happens typically. The second one grunts, also nothing happens. But as soon as the third one grunts, the likelihood of departure is already above 50%. If the fourth one grunts, it's already up at 90%. And so basically, as soon as they have a quorum, they go. But you do it with voting, right, with grunting. So that's the main function, it seems. Okay, so I'm going to go over now to the next topic of interest. So now we learned a lot about learned something about social cognition and how the calls serve, to express intentions. And, there's not much in terms of the lexicon. I mean, everyone here has probably a vocabulary of 50, maybe 100,000 words in Polish, in English, in French. It's incredible. Primates don't. It's a very small repertoire, and yet, they can do they can solve a lot of these daily problems in astonishingly clever ways with social cognition, because they understand each other. Okay, now I want to go to syntax. So that's often been sort of highlighted as the kind of crown jewel of language, right? Syntax. And so here's an early study. So this is really how we got sort of interested in this. Probably many of you know gibbons. They sing. They're monogamous mainly, and the breeding pair sings together almost every day in the morning. And just a quick recording here. So they get, so these are 2 animals duetting. Okay, so this can go on for 20 minutes, even longer. And what you can do now is you can analyze the sequences. And for Lar gibbons, the species that we analyzed, we found, about 8 different song units. You see spectrograms here. You can see they all look a little bit different. And when you now line them up in a sequence, you see that basically, so each square is 1 song unit represented by a symbol. And you can see that here, it's pretty arbitrary, pretty random, right? So this female starts with this song unit, and that one goes back to the first one, then, another one, and so on. So it just seems like they all sort of do whatever they want, right? But then interestingly, if there's a predator, a tiger or a clouded leopard that they see, they also start to sing. And now they use the same song units, but they assemble them in a very different way. So you can see this on the right here. These are the same animals responding, singing to a large cat on the ground. And basically, you can see again, there's a bit of individual difference, but the principle is just that once you pick a song unit, you stick with it. You repeat, you repeat, you repeat, you repeat. And you generate a completely different acoustic experience in that way by just sort of repeating and not going through your repertoire the way you do it in the early morning songs. So that was obviously a reason to ask, well, does it mean anything to others? And so here was Julie Andrieux, who did her PhD on this, and she was very brave. She basically put playback speakers up into the high canopy at the border of a gibbon group and played back the songs of a neighboring group, right, to make it really realistic. And on the one hand, she played the normal duet calls, the first one that you've heard, or she played the predator songs of the same group. And then she measured how her animals reacted to that. And you can see there's no doubt that they recognize it, because the vigilance goes up to the predator songs, the gaze to the ground goes up. They seem to start searching where the predator might be, etc. So they listen to these songs and they know exactly if it's a duet song or a predator song. So there's more examples like that, quite a few. So just another system. Here is the Campbell's monkey. So that's a leopard alarm. A bit louder maybe, sorry. And this is an eagle alarm. You can see it's very different, right? You can do playbacks again. You play back these calls, everyone reacts exactly how you predict. But now what's interesting is they can use a suffix, so they can do crack that you've heard before, but then here you can see there's this little structure added on. It's almost like cracku or hawku. So this is hawk. And then, sorry, it doesn't play. But so basically, it's a little suffix that they add on, and if they do that, normally it's just maybe an eagle, maybe a leopard. So it kind of takes away the specificity. If you play back these sort of suffixed calls, the recipients don't react very strongly. They may look, but no one really panics. So it's almost like it gives the monkey the opportunity to say, well, guys, be careful, maybe an eagle, I'm not sure, and then they add the suffix, right? So it's sort of a modifier, if you want. Okay, and now, two recent studies, they just have come out, yet another monkey species. So this is the olive colobus monkey, also in West Africa. They also have a very simple alarm call system with just 2 calls. So this, so, and then like that, right? So it's this really weird. I mean, it sounds like first you think it's a bird, but in fact, it's a monkey. These 2 calls, that's all they do. And in fact, even in social situations, only do that. So it's basically a lexicon of 2 units, right? You cannot go any lower. It's a Morse code system almost. But nevertheless, they use these signals in sequences. And so here's an analysis that Quentin did just recently. And so he got a whole bunch of recordings, some of which were done when I did my PhD then. So there's like 20 years of recordings he analyzed. And you can see now green is A and B, and yellow is B, the B called it, the high-pitched one I did before. And so basically they can either start with a B call, but then if they give a B call, always follows an A call. So that's a syntactic rule in this system. But after that, it can either be a B again or another A, and you can see it sort of branches out. They can also start with an A call, then switch to a B, or carry on with A's and so on. So you get this sort of rich system of call sequences with just 2 calls. So it's not random at all, right? There are a few of these grammatical rules in here that the monkeys follow when they call. So we're wondering what's going on, right? Why would they do this? So we only now studied the responses to predators and looked at the probabilities of, like, once you give an A call, what's the probability of your next call? So this is the second analysis. And you can see that's given here by this number. So once you give an A call, then, with a thick arrow, you're very likely to give another A call if you're an olive colobus monkey, and even a third one. So once you picked A, you usually stick with A. And then you usually do this in response to eagle. So it's like, like that, right? But not always. So sometimes you can also go A and then you switch to B, but then you go back to A again, and then it is almost certainly an eagle. So blue is eagle. Green is a falling tree, like a large tree in the jungle falls down, makes a big crashing sound. They call to that. And so that's sort of the first sequence types. And you can see it's not random, it's sort of like it can always sort of make a prediction what comes next. If you start with a B as a monkey, either you're talking about a leopard or you're talking about a falling tree. It's about a 50% chance. But then comes the rule, then you have to say A after. Now, if you say A again, it is just falling tree. If you switch to B or you stop calling, it's a leopard. See? So it's fascinating how with these two calls, they encode, at least 3 different external events. And mind you, they also use these calls in intergroup communication. We haven't even started analyzing this yet. And so maybe to summarize this, so here's your monkey. He decides to either give a B call. If he does a B, he already thinks it's probably a leopard, but it could be a tree. It may be a tree. Sometimes the predators you don't see, you have to infer. There's stuff happening in the trees up there. It's often an eagle who's, trying to fly around, but sometimes it's also a branch breaking. And so the monkey initially doesn't always know what's going on. So it's almost like it allows the recipients to make predictions. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. It's a bit like, ChatGPT, you sort of, you say something and then the machine generates what's likely to follow next. That's how these large language models work. And so it's a bit similar here. It looks, so once you give an A, you're very likely to, keep on Aing, or you do BA, or once you start a B, then, it goes either to tree or leopard. Okay, so that's sort of quick sort of summary of the types of syntax that you get in these monkey communication systems. There's also evidence in Bonobo. I don't have time to go through everything, but basically the message is it's pretty common actually. No one really knew this, even like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but I think now everyone accepts that these sorts of simple syntactic rules are really widespread, at least in primates, probably also in other animals. People haven't looked yet. So what does that tell us about human language? Are these the origins of human language? Should we think of these systems as, the very early forms of syntax, of human-like behavior? Well, I think probably not, because, what we do, and what I'm doing now, what you do, before and after this talk is you communicate about entire events. You don't just say leopard or maybe leopard, right? You describe to your partner, what you've seen, what you think might happen, what you're going to do tomorrow. And so that's the essence of human language. You communicate entire events. And that's sort of, I think why, linguists always sort of, go on and say, well, this monkey stuff, it's interesting, but it really has nothing to do with what we do. Take a sentence like, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, right? You can parse the structure if you have, basic command of English. And, it'll be a noun phrase, the colorless green ideas. And then you have a verb phrase, what do they do, these things, and so on. And the reason that you understand this is because in your head, you have this, presumably the same way of passing speech, that you reconstruct the event. And here you struggle because it's a nonsense event, but you can still pass the syntax properly. You can also think of more complicated sentences. For example, neither did the linguist we consulted object, nor was she interested. So this is a lot more complicated. But, for those of you, with a command of English, you can pass this, you understand what I'm saying. Why? Because somehow you manage to, to translate this speech signal that I've just produced, which is really one-dimensional, into a hierarchical structure. Who did what to whom? Who was the agent? Who was the patient? What happened between the two? And so there's no evidence whatsoever like this so far in primates. And so I'm just going to show you a little video clip. And the idea is you just watch this. It's kind of silly, but just these animals interacting. And then the idea would be that afterwards I ask, well, what did you see in this video? So I'm going to turn the sound down a bit. So it's just one of these random YouTube videos, right? So cat is a cat, climbs down a tree. So I'm already translating this into language. Oof. Okay. So you can see it's very simple. But if I asked, what did you see? You would say, okay, there was a cat. It climbed down a tree. And then it encountered a dog. And then the dog started chasing the cat. And then the cat climbed up the tree again, right? So that's sort of, so you would, this whole flow of information, you would break into elements, sort of event units. And each event unit, in a sense, is characterized by this. A acts and causes some change in a patient. So first, the cat climbs down. You only have acting. No change is really caused to the tree. But then, the cat encounters the dog, and the dog freezes. So the dog is the patient. And then the role switches. That's why you need to start a new event and a new sentence, because now the dog becomes the agent, the actor, because it chases the cat, right? So in language, we would certainly stop this and start a new sentence to mark this change. Anyway, so that's really how, if you want, our human communication system, our language works, that we are able to talk, report about entire events, and we can structure them into the components. And the components are always an agent doing something to a patient, and the two are interlinked. So the agent's action, in a way, causes almost like a mold into the patient. It causes a reaction. They belong together in a unit. But when we talk, we keep them apart. We talk with the agent, what it's doing, and what the impact is. So now, as far as we know, no primate communicates anything like this. Except for us. And so what's going on? Why are they not talking about what happens to them? What happened to others? Why don't they talk about their dreams or their plans or all this? It's just they do really remarkable stuff, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of translation of that into communication. We do it all the time, right? We love gossiping. We love talking what's going on, what other people do. So I want to now go to the last research program that's trying to crack this one, which in some sense may get us closer to language than the monkey stuff that we've seen before. And so the way, our hypothesis was that maybe animals just don't see events in this structured way. Maybe everything is just sort of one unit, right? Cats and dogs belong together. They do certain things, and they don't really perceive an agent and a patient. It's just sort of a holistic one. Could be, right, that they don't break it down, whereas we do. We want to know who does what to whom. That's the key thing that we'd like to decide first. So it may be that apes don't do it, or it may be that they can do it, like we do, but they're just silent about it. They never really, express what they see. So that was our approach. And so to do this, so this is unfortunately stuff you can only do in captivity. And so we had the fortune to collaborate with a zoo in Switzerland, with Basel, who let us use eye tracking devices and touch screens. And so this is a technique that is well established, especially with primates. And the way it works is you have a big screen and you show them something on the screen, and then you can, with an eye tracker, you can sort of see what does the the ape pay attention to. You can track the gaze across the video clip. The problem's always that, you can't tell them, come and sit still, that they're not going to respond to that. So you somehow have to do a little trick, and the trick is what you see here. It's a little tube that delivers juice. So that the ape comes and he knows he can, it's a bit like a straw. He can get his milkshake like this. And while he sucks on his juice, we can calibrate his gaze and record everything. So here's a video clip so that you see how this works, what kind of data this produces. Everywhere where the gaze goes, it's illustrated here by a circle. The longer he looks at something, the bigger the circle, right? Just to sort of give you a sense. So that's the calibration now. And now he sees this video clip, and you can see now he's very, very interested in what the agent is doing to this inanimate tube. Just one more time. So you can see in the beginning, he's orienting, he's like looking all over. You can see quick, he's sort of scanning, and then he homes into the key interaction. So the great thing about this technique is that you can now test, any animal who's willing to pay attention to these videos, including humans. So you can really do comparative research. You can see how would a human look at this? And how would an ape look at this? Now, humans, we know, they will immediately try and figure out who's the agent. Well, the agent here is the orang doing stuff to this tube, right? So for us, agent, patient, and then the action, what the ape's doing to the tube. So that would be our way of structuring it. So whatever humans do when they watch this video is in some ways the prediction, for a structured analysis. Now, how do apes do this? If you show this to apes, how do they look at these videos? Well, it turns out that humans, when you show them these sorts of videos, what they do is, in the very first seconds, there's a huge peak of attention to the agent, right? And then it sort of, it winds down again. And towards the end here, in this particular case, another agent peak. So that would be an agent interacting with an inanimate patient, in this case, food. A lot of agent attention, very little patient attention. Now, when you do this with relatively young infants, you get something similar, but it's really messy. It's very messy data. So I think they're overwhelmed by these things. But look now at a chimp. It's almost a perfect human-like curve. There's no difference, really. Gorillas also very same curve, and finally orangs. So there's no evidence that great apes would look at these video clips of events in a different way from us. They seem to absorb the information exactly in the same way. Now, what was interesting is when you now have, so this is an agent here, this girl, reading a book, dealing with a book. So again, an inanimate patient, but not food. And now all species really lose a bit of interest in the agent for some reason. So food really has an agent attractor, so which you don't find in other objects. But again, infants are the great outlier, but adult humans, chimps, gorillas, orangs, the same pattern. Then what we found interesting is when you look at the social interaction. So here you have a social agent dealing with a social patient. Now here, obviously, the difference is that the patient will react, right? The food or the book doesn't really react; it just is. But animate patients, they respond. They will react to whatever you do to them. And here you have actually, it's almost like an opposite curve. That first, once they look at the thing first, all species have, if anything, a slight a slight interest in the patient first, and then it sort of evens out. But you don't have this sort of agent fascination. It's almost like they try and understand the whole thing. But again, humans, apes, exactly in the same way. Okay. Now, of course, you can say, well, it's just maybe low-level stimuli, and there may be alternative explanations, and I agree. So we did another technique now with touch screens. So this is a little bit more active. Now the ape gets to see the same video clips that you've seen before, and then suddenly the video stops. There's a still photo, and then the ape can freely choose what would he like to touch first. And we predicted we predicted for humans because humans really want to figure out the agent, that they touch the agent first, right? Whatever you show them, and then second, the patient. So again, this is stuff you can do with across species. You can see here, again, this is in Basel Zoo. All species, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans, had these touch screens. They can interact. You can see the orang is really clever. He actually uses a stick. He doesn't like to touch the electronics, but the same interest. And now the question was pretty much the same again. So video clip, so here an agent interacting with an inanimate patient, so hanging up a shirt, for example, or animate interaction, or here an inanimate agent banging on an animate patient, or finally two inanimate agents and patients. And so again, video clips, everyone saw the same thing across species, all hundreds and hundreds of videos. And again, by and large, the same patterns. If anything, the human children are again the outliers. So if it's here, the more to the right, the more agent preference. And again, really interesting. If it's animate patients and animate agents, it's much more balanced. So somehow the interest is shared between the two, but again, across the species. So we from this we concluded so far that we don't really have any evidence that a gray ape, when he sees something happening like us, that he perceives that in a different way. It looks like he structures this event exactly the same way like we do. Someone is doing something to someone else, just by the way they divide their attention. And so I want to end now with an ongoing study, which is along the same lines, but it's where the link with language perhaps is a bit closer even. So until now we only have agents and patients, and they could choose freely, right? They were not rewarded. They could just either pick agent or patient. Now we make it more complicated, and also give them the option to pick the behavior, the interaction between the two. So there's something happening. A girl kicks another girl. The video stops. And now the question is, which circle do they choose? They can freely do whatever they want, right? We don't reward them for anything. And here, same thing, a girl now cuts her orange tree. So patient, and the action that binds the two together. And so obviously we predicted, agent first, right? Agent, and then perhaps patient. But now with the action, the reason why we thought this was interesting is because when you look across languages, so here is the world map with each dot being a language, independent language. And now when you study these languages, you can basically determine, does a language prefer like putting the agent first, like the subject, or the object, and V, the verbs. So subject, object, verb, or agent, patient, verb, right? So that would be the bright red ones. You can see a lot of languages like that. But there's also languages like, for example, English, subject, verb, object. Like the cat chases the dog. So that's sort of a bit more pink, also very, very common. Then some do the verb first, verb, agent patient, also in reddish. But again, the agent has priority, right? And only very exceptionally do you get that the patient is mentioned first in a sentence followed by the agent. So that would be OS languages in blue. You can see these are really, really very rare. So we predicted from that the natural condition is to first go for the agent, and then, you're free. You can either pick the verb or the object, but certainly not the other way around. So what do they do now? Again, old species. So this is unpublished data, but I'm really excited about this. So here's humans, right? So these were just sort of random zoo visitors that we asked, could you please come and, look at our touch screen? We're going to show you a video, and afterwards you just pick whatever you want, right? You don't have to, no instructions. So these people, what they did is, in fact, they picked the verb first. So, but then you can see preferably subject object. So VSO seems to be, if you go back to them, so that's the, that type of language here seems to be perceptually the preferred choice. But again, look at the apes. Gorillas, VSO. Chimps, VSO, right? So this is animate, inanimate interactions. Now, animate, so agent, living patients. So here, this is really what, disturbed our linguists in the team, that now people, for some reason, pick the verb first. We can forgive them for that. But then, there was a bias towards the object, the patient. It's almost like they cared a lot more about the patient than the agent. And, again, the same in the gorillas. Chimps not, but, close. So, so this is really needs to be followed up. We don't quite know what's going on here, but there's obviously reasons to explain this data. But again, it kind of shows you, what you can do with these animals. So I think the big question now in the field is, well, given that apes seem to structure events, the world, that they see like we do, why don't they talk about it, right? Why have they not evolved the communication system that allows them to express what they see, right? So I think that's, well, at least to me, that's an interesting question. And hopefully, we can spend some more time on this and perhaps have answers then. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the talk. Thank you for your attention. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions now, but we will save some time for them after the debate, which should start in about 10 minutes. So if you'd like to ask Professor Züberbühler about some details, something more that got your attention, please stay with us a bit longer. Now a short break.